I'm going to shift the discussion back to credit unions taking positive action, and we're going to shift the focus away from the youth for a moment and start to talk about migrant communities and how credit unions have really been showing up with an array of programs and innovative solutions for those communities. To set the scene for us with a global and a US perspective, we have Jan Hoisaeter. Jan is Deputy Representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Washington, D.C. Here he is. Jan's career spans 23 years with the UNHCR, also known as the UN Refugee Agency. Welcome, Jan. Thank you for providing us with some context, what's happening on the ground and the needs of migrant communities. You can feel free to avail yourself of this microphone here at the lectern.
Yes, I wanted to thank the co-organizer for inviting UNHCR to this session and for putting the refugee displacement issue on the agenda for your very ambitious and impressive agenda. UNHCR, I'm sure many of you know quite a bit about what our agency does. UNHCR doesn't really roll off the tongue, so it's fine if you call us the UN Refugee Agency. For more than 70 years, we have worked with partners all over the world, supporting millions of refugees around the world. And this year has marked a grim milestone because the number of people who are forced to flee have surpassed 110 million. 110 million people around the world. It's the highest number ever recorded. And just for context, I think it's pretty much the same as all of the East Coast US states, the population along the whole East Coast US state population uprooted from their homes. And sadly, it is, of course, a reflection of a world in extreme disorder. And I think I have to say up front, we're all seeing this. We're witnessing at the moment another horrific war in the Middle East, causing more suffering, causing more harm to people, and bringing grave instability to a region that has already for some time been unable to resolve tensions. You also know that in the last couple of years, 12 million people have been displaced in the Ukraine, in and outside of Ukraine, and crises continue in the Sudan, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Afghanistan, just to mention some of the situations that lead people to flee their homes. And violence and instability also continues to happen here in the Americas. So far in 2023, the US border authorities have encountered, that's the word they use in their reports, have encountered 2 million people attempting to cross the US southern border. Clearly a major challenge at so many levels. But enough about the numbers. Of course, the issue I want to bring to this session is that as conflict grows, as violence prevails, civilians are the most impacted. And innocent people have to flee to stay alive. They have to flee with their children. They have to leave behind everything, even family members who are unable or sick or too old to embark on dangerous journeys. Refugees and migrants move along dangerous land routes. They're faced with the scourge of human trafficking, human smuggling. We see this here in the Americas and elsewhere in the world. The Darien Gap will be known to many of you. The Mediterranean Sea, likewise. They have become synonymous with lives lost, with vulnerable people exploited. We also see how conflict, violence, and persecution combines with climate change. I know another topic for your summit. Climate change that displaces more people, including across borders. And as more areas become increasingly uninhabitable, people who are displaced and their host communities will further struggle to access water, energy, and livelihoods. But let's debunk the myth that everyone who is fleeing, all refugees and migrants, are heading to rich countries. In fact, many are simply looking for the first safe and viable opportunity if it's available to them. Let's remember that 2/3 of the world's refugees are in countries neighboring their own. Nearly 90% of all forcibly displaced people remain in low and middle income countries. It's therefore imperative that we look at what can be done at each step along the routes that people are moving. At UNHCR, we often speak about the need to take a panoramic view of these situations, the need for a whole of route approach. My introductory remarks are not the place to elaborate on that in great detail, but let me highlight 3 key points. One is that people who are fleeing to find safety need to have access to enter countries to present their asylum claim. And they need to find systems that can make quick decisions about who is a refugee and who is not. And I can say that United States is one of the countries that struggle with this. The asylum system that is applicable at the US southern border was developed in the 80s, in the 90s, into the 2000s. It's not fit for purpose for the situation that this country is facing at the moment. The whole route approach, though, also requires alternative routes to dangerous land journeys. It requires resettlement efforts, legal pathways that refugees and migrants can find so that they don't have to be exploited along the route, real alternatives to embarking on dangerous journeys. And yes, we're critical and are supporting the US in improving its asylum system, but we also have to recognize how much the US is doing already when it comes to providing resettlement places, when it comes to providing pathways that are alternatives to dangerous journeys. And on this, the United States is certainly a global leader and continuing to be so. The success of such a whole of route approach depends not only on engagement by states and by organizations such as UNHCR. Indeed, for people to succeed in rebuilding their lives, they depend on welcoming host communities. This is true for so many aspects of our lives. Those who have been uprooted need shelter, they need healthcare, they need assistance to cover basic needs. Most of all, they need hope, they need opportunity to rebuild their lives through active participation in communities where they have arrived. Our collective response is most effective when migrants and refugees themselves engage meaningfully with policies, decisions, and programs that affect their lives. This is an important point. Refugees are agents of change and should have a seat at the table. It's both a moral imperative, but it's also the smart thing to do. If we succeed, it's a win-win. Successful integration and inclusion is, of course, good for people on the move, but it's also good for countries that are overburdened with too large displaced populations, and it's good for economies that desperately need more people. Unfortunately, these considerations, and you know this from the media, for instance, these considerations are not the prevailing ones in the public discourse today. Instead, we see increasingly divided, polarized, and inward-looking societies. Far too many politicians foment fear of refugees and migrants, dividing the world into us and them. Far too many people tolerate and even promote racism, xenophobia, misinformation, religious hatred, and hate speech. This is true even if the world today, divided as it is in some ways becoming smaller. The climate emergency, the COVID pandemic, it shows this. We're all interconnected. Yet both talk and action in too many countries is too often selfish and short-sighted. So all the more important that for all refugees and displaced people, they should know that they have our collective support, material, financial, moral, political, and that they can ultimately find welcoming communities where they can rebuild their lives. This challenging moment calls for our collaboration, our solidarity, and a whole of society response to people on the move. We need to come together around protection. We need to come together around humanitarian aid and development efforts. We need to come together in action to better share burdens and responsibilities. And that means governments, it means refugees, it means international financial institutions, it means development actors, it means academia, it means the private sector, It means civil society at large. We must all stand up for people forcibly displaced. We must speak up against anti-referee rhetoric, and we must create welcoming communities. There are so many great examples right here in the US of organizations, charities, companies, and individuals coming together in community settings all over the country. Yes, systems, institutions are important and need to be in place, but in the end, the response depends on people working with people. So let me congratulate again for putting this issue on your ambitious agenda. As credit unions, you're of course built around the very concepts of cooperation and shared resources. I really look forward to hear more in today's panel about how you can play a role with people who need our support and how we can work together to improve our collective response. Thank you.
You can feel free to join us up here. We're going to invite up Jennifer Esperanza to moderate the next panel on this topic. Jennifer is the Senior Director of Organizational Culture and Strategy at Coopera Consulting in Iowa. Jennifer's a trained cultural anthropologist with 2 decades of research and teaching experience on the intersections of culture and economics, just making me feel like I haven't done enough with my life. Jennifer's joined today by Dr. Natasha Rivers, Senior Program Manager of Sustainability and Measurement at BECU in Washington State. Welcome, Jennifer. Also, Tim Martin, Sustainability Specialist at BECU. Shaida Samimi, Financial Wellness Partner at Patelco FCU in California. And Mahnaz Akbari, Project Manager of the Afghan Allies Program at PenFed here over the river in Virginia. Jennifer, over to you and your fantastic panel.
Thanks. And just as the other panelists are coming up, I'd like to thank you all for coming here today, and for those of you who are online for logging into this really important meeting. As Jan's remarks, really resonate with what this panel is going to talk about today. I've been thinking about, the linkages between the refugee crisis and sustainability. For those of you who don't know, over 70% of the world's displaced people and refugees included come from or live in countries most vulnerable to climate change. The panelists here today were invited to share their professional and personal experiences, particularly how credit unions and their affiliated foundations have served as catalysts for inclusion, resilience, and social sustainability. And I'll just briefly introduce again the panelists, and they will share their stories. First, I'd like to introduce directly here to my left is Dr. Natasha Rivers, Sustainability Measurement Director for Boeing Employees Credit Union. And in this role, Natasha proposes short and long-term sustainability initiatives in addition to supporting the data collection for BECU's carbon footprint calculation. She received her PhD in Geography and Demography from UCLA and is a Leadership Tomorrow alum, a Social Venture Partners Brainerd Fellow. And I also have from BECU, Tim Martin, who is the Sustainability Specialist at BECU. And his primary role is to further sustainability initiatives with BECU, while also collecting data for BECU's carbon footprint and increasing opportunities for employee education and engagement. He has a master's degree in environmental science with a focus on holistic sustainability at the University of Idaho. And then we are followed by Shaida Samimi, who is Financial Wellness Partner for Patelco Credit Union in Northern California. And Shaida is originally from Kabul, Afghanistan, and immigrated to the US in 1981 as a refugee. She holds a bachelor's degree in business and has worked in the financial sector for 20 years. She is a certified credit union financial counselor and assists displaced people who fled their home country to resettle in California. And she has received multiple awards for the work that she does in improving financial health for the communities that she serves and her work in social impact. And last but not least, we have Mahnaz Akbari, And Mahnaz is a project manager from Afghan Allies Program at the PenFed Foundation. Mahnaz was a member of the Afghan National Army, where she commanded the first female tactical platoon in Afghan Special Forces. And after the withdrawal of the US military in August of 2021, she fled Afghanistan and assisted more than 30 female platoon members arrive and resettle in the United States. She now serves as a project manager for the PenFed Credit Union Foundation's Afghan Allies Program, which helps refugees settle in the United States. So I am just here to help shine more light on these amazing folks here. And so let's get started actually first with a question for Shaida and Mahnaz. And this is kind of a twofold question, so you can answer both of them. How can you tell us a little bit more about your experience settling in the United States as a refugee, and how has that experience informed you about the financial needs of refugees that you work with today?
Well, I'm Shaida. I'm originally from Kabul, Afghanistan. I immigrated here when I was 6 years old. And as a 6-year-old child who didn't speak a word of English or anything, I never envisioned myself that I would be sitting in a room such as this, advocating for refugees and all the financial literacy issues that they encounter when they do arrive into the United States. I've had an honor of working with Patelco Credit Union almost 6 years now. I love how our leadership team provides us support to help the immigrants, teaching the refugees financial literacy, because some of the obstacles as a refugee myself that I encountered is not understanding the banking system here, not understanding what is the difference between a credit union and a bank. It's just the basics that you and I know off the top of our heads. Many of these individuals that do enter the United States, the biggest issue that they have is they come from war-torn countries. They have no trust in their government and no trust in their banking systems. So what do you do to make sure that they understand that here in the United States, your money is safe, we're on your side, we're here to support you to be financially well off. And that's where we come in, I come in, and I promote that and I educate them through giving them classes, whether it's on-site, whether it's via Zoom, listening to a podcast, anything like, whatever way I can get the attention of my audience, I promote that for them to make them feel welcome, that they're can bank here. And it's the important aspect. You have to have a bank account here to do anything, whether it's to buy groceries or gas, rent, I teach them. And the most important thing is credit. If you don't have credit, you cannot even rent. I can sit here for hours and tell you all of the issues that the immigrants face on a day-to-day basis. Credit is the number one piece of it. And my goal is to get as many of these immigrants financially educated, at least with the basics within the first 6 months that they enter into US.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I think when someone decides to leave her country or his country, like it's a long process because they sit in their house, talk with their family, okay, because of the issue that we have in our country, because of the problem that we have in country, maybe because it's poverty, maybe it's because of political cases that they have in their country, or a lot of problems that they are facing in their own country. So they make decisions to leave their country, and they are ready, and they know if they go to another country, to a new country with more opportunity, like here in United States, they know they will face with a lot of problems, I don't know, a lot of problems because of the languages, because of the culture, because of the job. But my experience and other Afghans that came here during the evacuation 2021, it was a little bit different, because all of us, we had job, we had our country, we had our dream job. And so when evacuation or happened and our country, Taliban took control of our country, everything changed in one night. And because of the danger that we had faced in Afghanistan, we had to leave our country. And it's not because I lost my job. It's not because I lost my family. It's like talking about like 40 or 35 million people back in Afghanistan that are facing with a lot of problems. All these things that I and other Afghans that came here during the evacuation, like it affects us. Like we were thinking like, what will happen to our country? What will happen to our people back in Afghanistan? For women, like a lot of women like me, like during these 20 years that America was in our country, we gained a lot of things. We fight for our right in Afghanistan. Me as a soldier, like I was in military, and for 10 years I participated to night raids with American soldiers, and every night that I was going to the mission, I did know like maybe I die one of the mission, but I fight for my country. But when it happened, evacuation, like a lot of we were facing with a lot of problem, mental problem, that it was really hard for us to believe that we lost our country for a night. So we were here, and I think one of the biggest financial problem that you asked, for us, it was rental assistance or housing, because when we just came to the United States, the resettlement agency told us, okay, because you're adult and you can have a job or something like that, we just pay for 3 months of your rent. So after that, you need to have a job or find a job. And after that, you need to pay for like your rent. And so for me, because I did know a little bit English, it was really, I could like find a job for myself, but for other people that came, because they didn't know the language, like it was really hard, especially for women. Even I was in Afghanistan, I was an independent woman. And so like I had a job, I could like live by myself. But for women in Afghanistan, because culture is really different from Afghanistan to here in the United States. So it was really hard to like accept, okay, how I can find a job in 3 months and after that pay for all the rent or something like this. So I think that regarding to your question, like financially, I think the rental assistance was really important.
Thank you for that insight. What I'm hearing from both of you is that the experience of refugees, while there are some similarities to immigrants, we have to remember that there are different contexts by which they arrive in the United States, especially for refugees. There's little time for planning, right? It's about evacuation. And so when you find yourself settled in a new country, you don't have that buffer of time to have been able to plan for savings. And so you are really at the mercy of a different timetable than many immigrants. So I appreciate hearing your insights and the kind of work that you do and the challenges with helping refugees settle. My next question is for both Natasha and for Tim. On the side of, the credit unions and the foundations, what kind of community impact projects, for example, has BECU been involved in?
I do want to sort of also make a connection about even being focused on this work. And my dissertation was on tracking sub-Saharan African immigrant and refugee migration to and within the US. So I studied a lot of immigration law, very new to the credit union space, but the fact that I can use that background in my role was really amazing. I love that this is called United in Sustainability, because a lot of times we have to make the business case to bring sustainability and even social impact into the conversation. And so I'm speaking on behalf of the social impact team that is part of BECU, but again, it's the work that Tim and I do to further these conversations within the credit union space. And with that said, in this department, we've got about 5 areas: cooperative advocacy, philanthropy, community engagement, and then sustainability. And through those collaborations, both internally and externally, we were able to launch the Green Equity Initiative. That is through our BECU Foundation, because today we're talking about case studies. And just naturally, we were able to attract some great nonprofits. And one I'll talk about right now is the Refugee Artisan Initiative. So this is led by a dynamic leader. Ming Ming is her first name. But essentially, there are these refugee artisans that they train and skill in several techniques And it's part of the circular economy conversation and workflow that's happening in Washington State. So they get recycled Starbucks coffee bags, and through that, they're able to make lunch bags for kids and also tent and warm clothing for our homeless population. So just talking about paying it forward. And a lot of times, one thing I want to add too is that a lot of our funding is unrestricted. So we rely on sort of a trust-based philanthropy model where we hear from the nonprofit organizations on what they want to do. We see them as the experts, so we don't put restrictions on the funding that we give to them. And then additionally, last year we launched the 10th ERG, an environmental sustainability ERG. And Tim has done a lot of great work to sort of educate our employee base on why initiatives like green equity and other community involvement is so important. So I'll pass it to Tim.
Hi, all right. Yeah, so as Natasha said, we have our environmental sustainability employee resource group. It's the newest of the ones at BECU, but it is debatably the largest. We have around almost 200 employees inside of it. And so we get a lot of interest and volunteer opportunities from them. And the ERGs are also provided with money to do events or activities. Most of that goes to donate, most of it ends up being donated to the community. And this is kind of where intersectionality comes in very much, is with, especially with groups such as refugees. When they come to the United States, they often still end up in the more underrepresented parts of the cities. So we put money towards nonprofits that go to improve the environmental aspects of the underrepresented part of the cities. So that helps not just refugees, but also everyone else who lives there as well. And we also get a lot of volunteers from the ERG to help with communities such as that in terms of community cleanup and a lot of environmental restoration.
Great, thank you. I love those examples of, trust-based philanthropy, this idea that, giving dollars towards projects where you don't have to, know every single aspect of it, but trusting really the folks, the recipients of those grants to be able to do the work that they want. And also great participation from the ERGs. What's been the feedback, Natasha and Tim? What's been the feedback from the community and from your members? What are you seeing out there?
That's another great question. BECU has a lot of signature programs. One I'll just briefly touch on is Member Summit, that's handled by our community engagement team, fantastic team. And members get to sort of talk about what they want to see and what they're interested in. So we do know there is an interest in making BECU a more sustainable credit union. And then, just in addition to that, there was a video shared on our trust-based philanthropic efforts, and Refugee Artisan Initiative was covered in that. So we've done some media around that. Tim has also worked on articles to educate members, and we've updated our pages on our .org as well, so they can follow our sustainability journey. But essentially, most of what we hear is very positive, and we try to engage members in surveys as well. We've had an EV test drive. We also do sort of a brand tracker survey to see, like, do people even know what green lending and sustainability is referring to when you talk about a financial institution? So we're trying to empower community employees and these nonprofits all at the same time.
I have a question for Shaida and Mahnaz. What have been some of the challenges that you've run into with the work that you do?
One of the biggest challenges was we were not prepared. In 2021, when the Taliban were removed out of sight the US left Afghanistan, many people just jumped on planes and they didn't know where they were going. They ended up, a lot of them, in Northern California, Sacramento, California. I'm grateful my upper management allowed me to take a week off. The challenges were they were in hotels. These people just came. They had no plan. They didn't know where they were going to put them, how they're going to feed them. I took a week off. I helped initially 13 families get enrolled into schools, took them to get enrolled into public assistance, all through the my leadership team approving time off for me to be able to do this. From there, I started working with World Relief. I'm on their advisory council right now. I have inside information through them, how many immigrants, whether it's from Ukraine, Afghanistan, or crossing the border, are entering and being relocated in California. Right now, 1 in 9 Afghan refugees are being resettled in Northern California, Sacramento areas. 1 in 6 Ukrainian refugees are being resettled in Sacramento. So I have a lot of those people there that need help. I'm grateful because Patelco also has been helping me develop a lot of financial literacy classes to them and incorporating a lot of our employees into attending these, whether they're on-sites, whether they're resource fairs, getting the knowledge out to them. Like, hey guys, you need to get financially literate in order to be successful. Follow these tools. We're not like the big banks. The big banks just are after the numbers, open a credit card, open this, open that. We hold their hand literally and coach them step by step on how to make that American dream and take advantage of that opportunity like I did as a little girl to be successful and instill hope into these families so that they don't give up. You know, they're finally settled. They suffer a lot with mental health, PTSD. You know, it's just helping them assimilate little by hope. And I'm grateful Patelco has always been supportive of my work.
Thank you. I think my experience is the same as Shaida John. Let me, before I start, like we were a group of female back in Afghanistan, soldier female that work with a special operation United States, and we work with US soldiers that operate the night raids back in Afghanistan. Our mission was like to target the ISIS and Taliban leaders back in Afghanistan. So when evacuation happened, we came here by the support of our American advisor. And so when we came here, PenFed Foundation tried to step up and try help us. At that time, I didn't work for PenFed Foundation. I just started my job with PenFed Foundation. And when evacuation happened, we were in the camp, military camp for 2 or 3 months. And we had a lot of problem, and also we didn't know about like the culture, like as Shaida John said, like what is the credit card, what is the like this kind of stuff. So when we get out from the military camp and the FTPs, like our colleague were settled in all over the United States, and we had a lot of problem. We didn't know about the culture. We didn't know about like what is the credit card, and like other problem that we were facing, and a lot of us didn't know language. And the good thing that I think at that time PenFed Foundation did, like they hired a person who from our community. So we had like direct communication with the PenFed. So every time we had like daily, they have like daily report from the female, our colleague that PenFed directly helped them. And so we talk about them, like what is our problem. We had like rental assistance problem. We had like they put a lot of classes, like mental classes regarding the credit card classes, like language classes, like all of the things that, all of the challenges that we had, like with our life here in the United States. So PenFed Foundation started to make direct communication and ask about our problem, what is our problem, and like they put like a lot of classes and help financially help, like car grants, and mental problem that we had, like even a dental grant, and a lot of things that PenFed Foundation help during the challenges that we had at that time.
Thank you. You know, I was thinking, Shaida, about you know, those statistics of the refugees who are coming into Sacramento area. And I can't help but think if we go back a few decades, actually, right after the Vietnam War, there was a huge surge of Vietnamese refugees that were placed in the Sacramento area. And I'd like to share this story, just kind of an example of what can happen, some positive things that can happen. You know, in the late 70s, early 80s, when refugees from Vietnam were placed in Sacramento area, they stayed in these temporary camps, and there were job training programs that were available for folks there. And, you know, at one point, this Hollywood actress, Tippi Hedren, I don't know if any of you remember her, she came through, and the women in the camp really admired, for some reason, her nails. And they said, "You have such beautiful nails. How can we learn how to do this?" And she said, "Well, I'll bring my manicurist and she'll come and give you training." It started with 10 women who taught more women, who taught more women. And now the majority of nail salons in the United States are run by Vietnamese families. It is an $8 billion industry, right? And this is, people tend to think it's something cultural. No, it's a new skill that they learned, and they had to learn right away. They didn't need to know English. It was very quick. And they opened in areas where they were allowed to open businesses, which was African-American and Latino communities, because they were barred from more upper middle class communities. So it was a win-win for so many different neighborhoods that had blocked out of entrepreneurial opportunities. For opportunities for consumers who wanted, you know, access to things that had previously been barred from them. And we're seeing, you know, this ripple effect. So it's not just, you know, serving refugees out of the goodness of your hearts. Of course, we're doing that, but it's also, there's a lot of potential as well, right? Think about Chobani yogurt that was started by a Syrian refugee, and list goes on and on. And so with that, we have some time for questions from the audience, if that's okay. Patrick, I don't know how we are doing with time.
That's definitely okay. We've got at least gotten one question's come through over the Q&A. We'll start there and let everybody else in the room give some thought to whether they've got questions. Question is, Jennifer, how can we improve the immigration policy in the US? Jan, you might want to jump in on this too, given how we currently treat the people who are already in our country. I got muted. Through poor mental health treatment, people who are already here in poverty. What does a progressive immigration policy look like that doesn't run counter to what we're doing domestically?
Yeah, I think Jan probably has more expertise around this, but just to start, you know, Jan, I really appreciate your thoughts on the fact that the current asylum policies that we have here and the programs for resettling refugees are really antiquated, right? They need some refreshing. We really need updating. And I think credit unions can serve as that mediator to kind of help give insights, to help give support. They know their community very well. They're getting to know the community. And so, you know, finding ways to connect with providers such as Catholic Charities, World Relief, you know, International Rescue Committee. Those are some partnerships. I'm sure BECU also partners with a lot of community organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, can we maybe pass a mic to Jan for some thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question, which could be the topic of the whole next summit you have. But just to say, it's a complex issue. It's a very significant challenge. And as Jennifer said, the United States needs to reform its immigration system. And that's going to be not a quick fix. It's going to be a long journey. And we need to break that down into the different parts that it entails. And it'll be too far to go into it here. But a very important starting point is to recognize that reform is needed. That's a very important starting point, and one that I have to say that the current US administration has recognized and has started developing plans to implement, and UNHCR and many others will be needed to help that process forward. there are, I think it's important to build on all the things that the United States has been able to do through the years. We shouldn't, I think, only look at what's missing, but also what has been working in this country. And we've heard some examples here of things that have worked, success stories. We need to build on those. We need to learn from those. And we need to work, as I said in the opening, not only on national responses, but on regional responses, on collaborative efforts, for instance, in the Americas, which has which is a shared challenge, that it's not a country by country response, but needs to be a regional effort. And then again, there's a lot we could say about that. Maybe to highlight one thing that I think, especially given that I opened very much with a very somber statement on all the things we're up against. But there's also a lot of good news in terms of opportunities. And one I wanted to highlight is how technology can help us in developing response capacities. And I think back 10 years, I was at the external borders of the EU, European Union at the time, working on the response to Syrian thousands who arrived every day, Syrians and Afghans who were arriving in Europe. And I was part of a border team, and we were, very well prepared in many ways in terms of blankets, in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of even temporary shelter that people needed as they arrived, a very large logistical operation. We had completely underestimated that one of the first questions we got when people arrived every day was, where are the charging points? How can I charge my mobile phone? How can I connect? How can I find a card that would allow my mobile phone to connect? Because I need to be in touch with my loved ones. I need to understand what's happening. I need to get information. A lot has happened in 10 years that have passed since then. And we continue to see a lot of opportunities emerging in terms of how refugees and migrants can be empowered through technology and through accessing information through technology. But my main point is on the counterpoint of that, receiving communities are also empowered through technology. And it's so interesting to see in recent years how reception capacities, when it comes to shelter, when it comes to transport, when it comes to information and access to labor market, now can be facilitated through online platforms. The Airbnbs and the Ubers of the world and the Yahoos and the Googles are getting involved with refugee responses. And I think we're only seeing the beginning of how that can help us collectively to improve and to complement, yes, what is a state responsibility first and foremost under the Refugee Convention to make sure that there is an adequate national response. I think that's just scratching the surface, but just a few observations.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback off of that because it also reminds me of, because the question was first centered also around mental health, right?
What does a right-sized immigration policy look like, given that we already largely neglect people who are already here, not people who are migrants?
Yeah, and I would, either Tim or Natasha might be able to have some insights, but, my question also, a follow-up for you is, what's the impact? What does it look like when you allow for grant programs to be given to folks who have the capacity to come up with community initiatives themselves? Does it make an impact, let's say, on their mental health to have that sense of purpose?
Yeah, I would say yes. So in terms of the Refugee Artisan Initiative, those refugee artisans, right, have a livable wage. You've also empowered that CEO or executive director of that nonprofit to feel empowered because we're giving up to $100,000. A lot of environmental sustainability orgs don't get that amount of money when they go to a pitch competition or apply for funding. So we're actually empowering them through the high dollar amount and unrestricted funds. And then they're helping the artisans. And then also those artisans are helping the community by giving back to both youth and the homeless population. So it feels good on all layers for the people involved. And we sort of measure that through our reporting. So we ask all of our grantees for a mid-year and end-of-year report so that we can keep refining our grant programs based on what we've heard from the grantees.
Do we have a question in the room, perhaps? We probably have time for one more
Bringing this back to environmental sustainability as well, maybe this is a question for Jan, and thank you so much for your work with UNHCR. How do we see that the laws governing immigration today are going to support the ever-growing number of climate refugees as we move into the next decade or so?
Thank you for that question, which is, of course, very topical and a huge one, and maybe a topic for a whole nother summit again. I think, you know, it doesn't really have a 1-minute answer, except, again, first to recognize that that is a reality. I think we're still in a situation around the world where the climate change impact and how it, including how it affects populations that are displaced, is not fully recognized and not fully built into countries' responses to those movements. The international regulatory framework, the Refugee Convention and other relevant conventions that provide rights and obligations around population movements, are also not fully updated to reflect the reality that climate change can and will result in population movements. And it's something that preoccupies UNHCR. It's something we're looking at. How can we contribute to that international framework? We're also, maybe just one word of caution from our side is the Refugee Convention has, through the years, provided protection to millions of people and continues to do so. We are a bit worried about saying, oh, it's outdated, we need to change it. Let's open it for renegotiation. Let's include climate refugees. Why are we concerned? We're afraid if we open up that firmly developed and hard-fought international framework for state obligations, that we would throw out the baby with the bathwater. We would potentially risk losing the consensus that the world has about the need to protect people who have no country to return to. So we need to find, how do we build on the framework we have? How do we add to that to make sure that people who are displaced because of climate change can find protection, but of course also that when people have found protection, that they do not contribute to the environmental problems that exist. And I have worked myself in the world's biggest refugee camp in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar. Almost 1 million people in one environment. You can imagine what that's done to the fuel, to the environment when people collect wood for fuel, etc. We need to make sure that the response capacities to displacement in the world are done in a way that also takes into account impact on climate. And it's easier said than done. But I guess the positive end note on this is it is a collective priority by the whole UN system, by so many countries. I think we need coming together around these issues, including in the next COP meeting that is very close. We have no choice. We need to make progress on this, and we need to make it fast.
We're gonna have to leave it there. Do you put your finger on the work of today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future? Can we have a round of applause for our panelists?